We're online.
Yeah, yeah. Normally I'd move up about 3 benches and but since Jeff's already locked in here, I guess we'll just stay right here. mm, yeah. Look at that go, man! I tell you. Need to uh, keep Ann in prayer. She's supposed to see somebody next week. She hopes about her back, and then Lucretia. Obviously, they're staying in. Her and Philip are staying in. So, but I think last I've heard that she's starting to slowly improve, but concerned about that. So, need to keep her in prayer as well. Um, Trying to think if there's anybody else I can think of. Y'all got anybody? Life is good. Mm. Hmm. Yeah, it's definitely been a slower process than what they had hoped. I think. Yeah, but I think they were happy with the visit that they had at Longview with that doctor, so that was good. Hmm. Yeah, I think hopefully that they'll be have the records to review her stuff and all that kind of stuff too. So yeah, yeah. As a cousin, what you said? It's still hanging on. And we got all the schools that started up too. Everybody. All right. Dave, it looks like it's you. It's you or me, and I get to talk, so you get to pray.
Father, we thank you. Thank you for this day. Thank you for the blessings that you give us each and every day. Thank you for your presence with us tonight. And we know that you're here to help us and to guide us in everything that we hear and then what we will do with that in our own lives. We know that you'll lay all of that out for us and provide that path. Thank you, Father, for that. We do pray for those who are sick tonight, Father, and Lucretia and the cousin, the, those that are in need of you, Father, a very personal way. Help ones. Pray, Father, that we heal them. We just ask for a miraculous healing. We ask for good doctors. We ask for patience and long life. Pray for comfort for those who are watching on this Father. Thank you. Thank you for all of these things. And pray for Tony and I this evening. Brings us your word. Thank you. And pray for Jesus.
Yeah. All right. Deuteronomy 25. A little bit of a shorter text today. I do not plan on going into 26. Have a little bit of a break between the two, 25 and or yeah, 25 and 26. But so I really just want to go through 25. So a little bit shorter text, but good nonetheless. Continuing to Hey Norm, continuing to flesh out the covenantal relationship in very practical terms. So, a lot of times if you have the law and you have even the commandments, the question is how do you stay in covenant relationship, and then in with that, in staying in covenant relationship, what are the ideals of the Ten Commandments? How would you practice and play out the Ten Commandments in real life? So you have specifics that are still general enough to carry over into different situations. If a child asks, what a father means, the father will give him, specific instructions, but they're also meant to carry over into all other aspects of life. So they're principle and value based as well, and we especially see that in relation to this passage. 25:1. If there's a dispute between men and they go to court, and the judges decide their case, and they justify the righteous and they condemn the wicked, then it shall be that if the wicked man deserves to be beaten, the judge shall then make him lie down and be beaten in his presence with the number of stripes according to his guilt. He may beat him 40 times, but no more, so that he does not beat him with any more stripes than these, and your brother is not degraded in your eyes. So a judge will, a couple of things here to point out. When a judge passes judgment, he's taken responsibility for that which he has judged. So in carrying that out, he sees it through, because he's taken responsibility in relation to the way in which he's judged. There's some accountability in relation to that, and he's also seeing that it's actually carried out. And then in carrying it out, you would say, let the punishment fit the crime. The old Pollyanna movie. The two that were against each other, she comes in and has this nice squeaky voice and says, let the punishment fit the crime. And so she puts the two of them together in the same cabin, right? And so in what way, what happens now in relation to someone who has done wrong? The degree to which they are punished fits that which they have done wrong, okay? So a person who has done max, if you will, in relation to, doesn't deserve death, but deserves to be beaten, the max of that would be 40 lashes, okay? Now, why would I make a point of that? Who do we know was beaten to that degree? Okay? Paul. Yeah, Paul makes mention in his testimony how many times, specifically how many times that he was beaten. Do you remember, he says, twice I was beaten, and he names off how many times. Do you remember how many times he was beaten? 39. 39. Now, why 39? Yeah, and I guess that's the question, is why one under the maximum? It's in case they lose count. Yeah, in case they lose count. 49 is the max. But you get going and you lose count. What happens if you're at 49? If you're at 40, but you skipped one? Now what did you just do? You gave him 41 lashes for what was supposed to be maximum before God. So what did they want to do? They wanted to make sure that they didn't exceed what God said to exceed. Okay? Now, the irony of that is, it's Paul is the one who's getting beaten, right? So what did they consider in relation to the offense of what he had done? What did the judge consider in relation to the penalty that he imposed? What did he consider the crime to be? Max crime. Max crime. So you see the way that they viewed what Paul was doing based upon Old Testament law in relation to let the penalty fit the crime. Max is 40, which for them now is 39 because they might want to make sure they don't lose count. So the crime for what they consider the crime that Paul did was to be a max crime in relation to him being beaten. So when he says that in the New Testament, what he's saying is max crime under current law. I was given maximum penalty under current law. That's the way they saw that. That's the way they viewed what he was doing in relation to the church. Okay? So you have that. But notice so you have the judge then that's responsible for that. But notice in verse 3, beat him 40 times, but no more, so that he does not beat him with many more stripes than these, and your brother is not. Yeah. What do we have to take in relation to that? Why impose that? A lot of times when we think about the 9th commandment, to bear false witness, we think about it only in terms of falsely accusing. Okay? But think about this. When you falsely accuse someone, what are you doing in relation to that person's character if you falsely accuse him? Yeah, you're killing the character in the instance of maligning it. You're misrepresenting him. You're saying he's one thing, but he's another. You're bearing false witness against that. Now, most of the time, we only connect the 9th commandment to that. Okay? But what is another way that the 9th commandment can be broken in relation to this passage? You take a person and you beat him 50 times. What have you done? Let me make it easier for you. You beat a person 50 times. Scripture says you only beat him 40, lest you degrade him. You beat him 50 times. How is it that you have degraded him? So when you punished him more than the law, what have you done? You've broken the law, but how have you broken the law in relation to degrading him? Yeah, the punishment doesn't fit the crime, and so now you've misrepresented him because you said the penalty for that. So let's do what? Yeah. If you take the law into your own hands, if a person's committed a crime that says is due 5 lashes, and they give him 40 lashes, it would be considered as to have done the same thing. They degraded him and they broke the 9th commandment. How is it that they would have broken the 9th commandment? To bear false witness. By penalizing him more than what was due, you've misrepresented him in relation to that punishment. You've said he's this bad, when really he's what? He's not that bad. He's this bad. Okay? I want you to stop and think about that. I don't talk about it a whole lot. We don't bring it up a whole lot because here's what I'm saying. Most of the time, the 9th commandment does not really affect us very much. We don't think about bearing false testimony towards someone else because I didn't come in and say, hey, police, come pick up Dave because he was shoplifting when really he wasn't. I mean, that's mainly the way we think about the 9th commandment. To bear false witness is for me to say, Dennis did this wrong, when the reality is, actually, he didn't. But that's not the totality of bearing false witness. If I misrepresent someone in relation to their character and nature, I have done what? I've bear false witness as to who they are, their character and their nature. So stop and think about that. You misrepresent someone. Now, how many times do you do that? You have a tiff with somebody. And it's one thing. But when you get around your group, you do what? You add stuff to it. You've add stuff to it. That did all, and you are misrepresenting it. You wouldn't say that if he was in the room. What are you breaking? You're breaking the 9th commandment by bearing false witness. And you're doing it how? Because the reality is, by misrepresenting him, you're actually degrading him. It's pretty stout if you stop and think about it. It's really, really stout if you stop and think about it. Because we think about it just in relation to a legal term, court of law. As long as I don't say someone broke the speed limit or someone stole something that they didn't steal, I'm not breaking that commandment. That commandment is way fuller than what we think it is. Because to bear false witness is to represent someone as something that they're actually not. And when I do that, I am degrading them. Oftentimes I'm elevating myself at the expense of someone else. And I'm degrading them in that process. And when you do that, you're bearing false witness. You're not representing them rightly. It can be either way. Yeah, it can be either way. In that instance, you're doing it probably because in some way it profits me to present them as better than what they are. In some way it probably profits me. But guess what I'm doing? Bearing false witness because I am not representing them for who they actually are. Yeah, so on the one end you can have flattery, build up, you can, whatever, talk about someone better than what they actually are. But then on the flip side of it, you come in and you say this, that. This happens, this end of it happens tremendous amount in everywhere, especially the workplace. Especially the workplace. Right? The question you've got to ask is, if the person that I'm talking about were in the room and underneath the circumstances with whoever else was in the room, would I say these same things? And most of the time, what's the answer to that? No, I would not. No, I would not. You wait till I talk to him. He did da 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 da. They shouldn't have da da da. And you list it all out. How many times I've done it, you've done it. How many times when you then confront them that it equals the way you presented it with somebody else? Almost never. Why is that? Gossip would fall, I think, very closely in the same line. Yeah. Will that hold up in court? Yeah. Will the words that you are using to talk about the character of this person, if that was in court, how would that hold up under testimony? And why is that now important that we see from this passage? because you're dealing with the dignity of an individual who's created in the image of God. Well, if you said it in his presence, in the presence of other people, the assumption is that it's actually true, it's accurate. And if not, you'd be called out on it. See, a person may truly feel that way. I may emotionally feel that way, and I might say, I'll tell it to him and anybody else. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's still true, right? But it's not being hidden under this pretense of being something else. So it's definitely layered. Yeah, it's definitely layered in relation to that. But point being is, we generally think that the ninth doesn't really affect us at all. And the thing that I'm saying is, if you think about it in relation to the dignity of a person, then in relation to the dignity of the person, how are you speaking in relation to that person? Now all of a sudden you realize, oh, wait a minute, it encompasses a lot more than what I thought, because how I represent somebody matters. It matters even to the extent of punishment. See, most of the time when we're doing this in relation to someone else, it's generally some sort of judicial act. If we're putting them down, it's usually some judicial act in which they've done us wrong, or they're not doing something right that we think that they should, right? So it's the same vein that's coming from. But why does all of that matter? You know, why does false witness matter? And the answer to that is because the dignity of a person matters. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I think we talked, I don't know, a few weeks ago we talked about this a little bit. Someone gets accused of, and it can come out weeks later that none of it was true. But what happens? It stays with that person for the rest of their time. He was beaten 39 times, meaning Paul got max penalty, which means what? This is the type of person that he was. What were they actually doing? False witness against him when they condemned him to that and gave him a stricter penalty than what he should have had, which was nothing. And he got twice. Now, so stop and think about this as in relation to Paul. Now you understand where he comes in and says, don't take vengeance out on your own, leave room for the wrath of God, meaning allow God to be the one who judges. Because why? Paul, even in his beatings, was misrepresented, and his character was attacked in relation to that. And he could what? Carry that throughout his entire life and hold a grudge over somebody else in relation to that. How can you let that go? Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I will be the one who settles all of the accounts. He doesn't have to be justified, or even in that case, within the public's eyes, dignified in relation to what was done. So they gave, in relation to the New Testament, they gave Paul a penalty that didn't match. And what did it attack? His dignity. His dignity. You see all in the New Testament, how many times does Paul say, do not be ashamed? The apostles, do not be ashamed of my imprisonment. What are they speaking about there? Yeah. In a lot of ways, it's not just him. It's not a selfish request in relation to that. There's a punishment that equals who this person is, and now you got to overcome all of that. Why is it that you got to come over that? Because their dignity was misrepresented. The ninth commandment was broken, and the ninth commandment's broken, and so now what's the church doing in relation to that? They're having to weigh through, who is Paul? Who are these apostles that have been imprisoned?
What I can never understand about Paul, this is kind of a side, probably a rabbit trail here, but I could never understand about Paul. He'd take a whipping and go in, and then after it all over with, then you would tell him, hey, you didn't have the right to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Roman citizen.
Yeah.
Why didn't he say it before?
Yeah, I think in some cases he did. Um, but there's never a there probably is. I haven't found it if there is, but there probably is. There's never a consistent pattern with Paul of of I'm going to stand and take it, or I'm going to take flight. You see both with Paul. You see times in which Paul, in that case, before the riot, says, "Are you about to do this to a Roman citizen?" And they back off and say, "What have we done?" You know, and then he makes his appeal and is going to Felix and to the high court. There's times in which he stays and is beaten, and then there's times in which the church lowers him in a basket and he takes flight. There's times in which he wants to go and help a brother when they're in the middle of arena and he thinks he's fixing to be attacked, and the disciples say, "No, don't go. You need to flee." And he said that, yeah, would you do this to a Roman citizen? Yeah, 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 and I might be confused too, because the early church, you had Peter who did that when they were trying to get him out of prison, and said go, and they said, "No, you publicly put us in. You're going to publicly let us go," and that was Peter and I think John, I think. But there was a time in which, yeah, Paul said too, is this the way you treat a Roman citizen? And they're like, "Wait a minute, we didn't know you were." Yeah. Yep. Verse 4, "You shall not muzzle the ox while he's threshing." Remember the New Testament connection with that? Remember what Paul said to the church? Do we not have a right to receive payment? And he connects that to this passage. In other words, do church leaders not have the right to be taken care of by the people who they are working for? And the answer is yes. And his reference to that, well, where do you see that? Is Deuteronomy 25. So he's making an argument from lesser to the greater. If an ox is worthy of being fed for the work that he does, on the lowest level, shouldn't a minister be able to be taken care of by his flock on the highest level? And the answer obviously would be yes. But then he says, even at the lowest level it is, but we have foregone that for your benefit. So he's making an argument for that. It's from a lesser to greater argument. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, yeah. Right, right. While he was going, yeah, 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 yeah. Kept him moving. Yeah, yep. Um, Verse 5. When brothers live together, one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the deceased shall not marry outside the family to a strange man. Her husband's brother shall go in to her, take her to himself as wife, perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. It shall be that the firstborn whom she bears shall assume the name of his dead brother, so that his name will be not blotted out from Israel. If the man does not desire to take his brother's wife, then his brother's wife shall go to the gate of the elders and say, "My husband's brother refused to establish a name for his brother in Israel. He's not willing to perform the duty of a husband's brother to me." The elders of the city shall summon him, speak to him. If he persists and says, "I do not desire to take her," his brother's wife shall come to him in the sight of the elders, pull his sandal off of his foot, spit in his face, and shall declare, "Thus is done to the man who does not build up his brother's house." In Israel his name shall be called the one of whom of him whose sandal is removed. Yeah, it's what in the world is all of that about? there's a couple of examples that this may or may not be. The closest example of where it seems like it is going on is with was it Jacob? I should have looked it up. The sons that I believe it was Jacob, where the sons, the husband died, brother went in, he died, next brother went in, he died, and he says, yeah, I'll give you the youngest, but it's going to be a while before he's of age, and then never does. And she dresses up as a prostitute. He goes in, then all of a sudden comes up, Tamar's pregnant, and he's ready to have her killed. And then she had taken his staff and says, the child is the one of whose staff this is. Of course, it's his. His response to her is, you're more righteous than I. Why would he say you're more righteous than I? Because that sure doesn't look very righteous, all that happened right there. He wasn't willing to carry he wasn't willing to carry out the family name because he was at the expense, he felt, of his youngest son. He's thinking if the youngest son goes unto him, and it's almost, there's a sense of superstition. If he goes, then he's going to die as well. And if you remember there, I think that was the case where the sons actually weren't. They spilled their seed on the ground. They didn't actually even seek to carry out the family name. And so what happened to them as a result? They died. Why did that happen? Because they weren't willing to try and carry out the family name in relation to that. Do what? Yeah. Why? Yeah. 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 Short answer. Yeah, the signet ring and staff. Short answer is sin is irrational. Not exactly, but kind of. Yeah. That's the other example. Is that it's you get debate as to whether or not that is this, but it's not exactly this. There are some distinctions and differences in relation to that. The brothers did die. With Ruth, it was a distant relative. And then when she went to Boaz, because they found out that, distant relative, this is Boaz, he's your distant relative. Then when she approached him about it, Boaz came back with, there's a relative that's closer than I. He was going to take her until he found out. Well, and he had to take everything. He was willing to take the land, but he didn't want to take the responsibility of her and everything else. Yeah. There was an issue there, and we've got a second to look. Mm-hmm. So 3:12, it is true I am a close relative. However, there's a relative closer than I. Remain this night. When morning comes, if he will redeem you, let him redeem you. If he does not wish to redeem you, then I will redeem you as the Lord lives. So she laid with him, got the cloak. In chapter 4, Boaz went up to the gate, sat there. The close relative of whom Boaz spoke was passing by. Turn aside, friend, sit down. He took 10 men of the elders of the city, said, sit down here. They sat down. He said to his closest relative, Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab, has to sell the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. So I thought to inform you, buy it before those who are sitting here and before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if not, tell me that I may know you, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am after you. And he says, I will redeem it. So it's, there's a piece of property that's involved, and he sees the profit that can come from that property and says, I'll do it. Boaz then said, on the day you buy it, the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his, notice how the wording is, on his inheritance. So what does that mean? For him, the guy who's going to redeem it. He's not going to get that land. Their firstborn is going to be the one who actually gets the land. But see, that ties into then the covenant that God desired for them to have, because the land needs to stay in the family. Yeah. This is the custom in former times in Israel concerning the redemption and exchange of the land. A man removed his sandal and gave it to another, and this was the manner of attestation in Israel. See, but in this case, they're saying that's the contract. So it's different. It's the same, but it's different from what's going on necessarily in Deuteronomy, because in Deuteronomy it's a shameful thing. So the closest relative said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, and he removed his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders of all the people, you witnesses today that I bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Moreover, I have required Ruth the widow to be my wife in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance. So the name of the deceased will not be cut off from his brothers and from the court of his birthplace. You are witnesses. All the people in the court said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built the house of Israel. The distinction there too is what's the name of the man who didn't take Ruth? Yeah, he is the one who was supposed to, but is a no name. So Boaz, may your name be proclaimed for all generations. And we're still speaking about his name today. But the one who was did not, and his name is no name. Yeah, his name is no name. So in relation to covenantal terms, there is meant to be a passing on and that legacy to be able to carry on and continue. Which is kind of connection, I think, too, with what's going on in 11. It's a very weird thing. If two men, in chapter 25 of Deuteronomy, if two men, a man and his countryman, are struggling together, the wife of one comes near to deliver her husband from the hand of the one who is striking him, puts out her hand, seizes his genitals, then you shall cut off her hand, you shall not show pity. So, it's like, that that doesn't need to be talked about in church. More than likely, what's going on here is irreparable damage. So now what can he not do? He cannot no longer have children. So she now, see, before you've got a brother who should extend the seed and the family name, but what happens now if you have a woman who takes that same thing away? How bad is that? Bad enough to cut her hand off. So what is it that you are taking away? Right, you're taking away the availability probably for seed to be carried out for future generations. 13, probably moving towards this, probably connection to commandment number 9 and 10, bear false witness, and then also coveting, which is interesting because if you look at the case with Ruth, it looks like there may be a coveting issue going on there as well. Can handle the land, but now I get all of this other with it. And now all of a sudden, no, I can't redeem her. You can't or you won't. Probably you won't, right? Now there is the possibility that he didn't have the means to provide for Ruth and Naomi, or better said, didn't have the faith that God was going to, because he did the right thing, provide for them. But either way, all of a sudden, when people are attached to land, now all of a sudden, no, I'm not willing to carry that out, in relation to that. But it seems as though there was some sort of maybe a coveting of the land that was going on as well, right? It's interesting because when you talk about the ninth commandment, thou shalt not covet thy, and then lists it out, neighbor's wife, stuff, all of that. But what does that look like? 13, you shall not have in your bag differing weights, a large and a small. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall have a full and just weight. You shall have a full and just measure, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you. For everyone who does these things, everyone who acts unjustly is an abomination to the Lord your God. I'm buying and I've got one weight, and I'm selling and I've got another. So when I put it on the scale, what am I doing? Cheating you. I'm cheating you, right? I will pay you. I'll pay you for that 2 pounds of, or that 10 pounds of grain. I'll pay you $2. I'll give you a good price, $2 per pound. Puts the weight on the scale up. It's only at 5 pounds. But he grabbed the weight that was to his advantage. Right? And so what is he doing? He's getting 10 pounds of grain for 8 pounds of price. And he's the only one who knows about it. No. Right? So in business, what does this tell you in relation to the business? Dennis, I talk about this a lot. In business, do you have the availability to cheat someone to your advantage because of their lack of knowledge? In almost any and every business you do. Yep, in almost any and every business you do. All right. Now, notice within this there is a deception that's connected to it. Right. So it doesn't say here. Dennis comes in and says, yeah, we're going to do a brake job on your thing, and we're going to turn your rotors and put new brakes on it. And the back is good. And so he doesn't tell them that. So he doesn't turn the backs, which is supposed to be an extra $50, but he goes in and charges them the $50. Well, who's going to know? 99.9% of the people, nobody's going to know other than Dennis and God. What it doesn't say is, Dennis says, I'm going to do a brake job, and it's whatever I find. If your back brakes are good, great. If they need to be turned, I'll turn them. Doesn't matter. I charge $300, $500, whatever it is, for a brake job. Whatever I find, I take care of, but it's $500, bottom dollar. Okay. He finds 2 brakes that are, back set's good, front brakes are bad. He only has to change the front brakes, no problem, if that's legitimately the way that it is. So it's not a matter of how much I'm charging. It's, am I seeking to deceive in the midst of gaining more and cheating that person now in the process because they were not able to make an informed decision. They thought they were buying or selling a certain amount of weight, and they weren't because you were deceiving them with having different weights than what you were carrying. So what is that? That's being above reproach. But I'm also not, and you're stealing and, oh, by the way, coveting other people's stuff, which is leading you to steal. No, we got one bag. One bag. Christian's got one bag. This is how much it weighs. This is how much I'll give you. Fair enough. Yeah. But isn't it interesting that you've got to put that in? You wouldn't think you have to say that, right? but then it's like when when you find that dangling out there, it's a lot easier a lot of times to do it than what you think. 17. Remember what Amalek did to you along the way when you came out from Egypt, how he met you along the way and attacked among you all the stragglers at your rear when you were faint and weary and did not fear God. When you're faint and weary at the rear, what are you? Vulnerable. You're vulnerable. And, oh, by the way, you are the people of God. So I'm attacking the vulnerable, and I don't fear God. And I don't fear God. So, 19, it shall come about when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your enemies. So you've entered the land. He's conquered your enemies. And the land which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance to possess, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. You must not forget. All right? Must not forget. It almost seems like that's a vengeful, an act of vengeance, except it's that the Lord commanded it to be done. Right? So they're not doing it off of their own volition. In fact, the fact that He commanded it for them to be done implies what? Do what? Okay, well, but why do you make a command? Why do you say to your kids, take out the trash? Okay, but why do you have to say it? Because there's going to actually be a time in which she's talking about, I've got an older brother. I know y'all were wondering about that. I've got an older brother. Yeah. Because there's going to come up a time in which you don't want to. Right? There can be something appealing in these particular people that causes you to want them to actually live in the land. And God is saying what? No. Nope. Yep. Don't forget. Right? For someone that it's interesting because there's a throttle. For the people that you want vengeance, what does God do? Throttles you back. Because if you do it, is it righteous? In fact, it's interesting, the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. There's almost always a throttling back. But when you don't want to deal with sin or accountability, responsibility in carrying that out, you've seen it the last 3 or 4 chapters. When this is done, the judge throws the first stone, and all the people gather a stone, and all the people do this. Because what? When you don't want judgment, then what does God do? He pushes you forward because this needs to be done. It has to be done. He commands Aaron, when his sons offer strange fire, this is the way you respond to that. You don't mourn like everyone else. Why does he have to say that? Because there is within the heart of every man the desire to mourn the loss of their sons, no matter the sin. But in the position of leadership that Aaron had, and at that appointed time, if he did so, they would not see that as simply a father who was mourning the loss of a son. They would see it as a priest who is accepting the sin. and saying that God was unjust in what he did. So it makes a huge statement how he responded. That's why we say that all things might be available, but there are some things that are too holy for us to partake of. Why? Because what you do says something about that, because of who you are. So David, unrighteously, you might say, doesn't want justice for his son Absalom, and tells the people don't do it. And there's a servant who had the availability to strike Absalom, but he doesn't do it. Why? Because everybody heard what David said. But Joab does what? Joab kills him, which actually might have been a righteous act. I don't know. It's hard to say on how you see that, because Absalom is seeking to overturn the kingdom. You don't really see, penalty in relation there from God. He's being loyal to David more than the loyalty that David demands. There's a lot going on there. David hears about it. King David hears about it, and how does he respond? Like a father. Just like any father would respond. Weeping and mourning the loss of his son whom he dearly loved. Absolutely understandable. But the army comes in as what kind of an army? An army that won or lost? Actually, when they come in, they won, but they come in as an army who actually lost. Why did they come in that way? Because they were responding to what they saw in their king. Not a father, but in a king. And Joab does what? He goes to David. What does he say to David? What are you doing? And what's he appealing to? He's appealing to David as king. As father, you may feel one thing, but as king, you're doing another. And what did David do? He got up, went out, and some would say, and this is where you gotta be able to change hats. Some would say he was acting like a hypocrite. He's not acting like a hypocrite. What's he put on? What hat did he put on? His kingship hat. And as a king, it's a time to rejoice. As a father, it was a time to mourn. But as a kingly father, he didn't have the right to respond as everybody else. And that's a key point in leadership. Leaders do not have the right to respond as everyone else does. Not in every given situation or circumstance.
But didn't Absalom burn Joab's field also?
I'll have to look. There was.
Absalom wanted to get back with and talk to David, and he couldn't get the job done. So he called Joab. Joab didn't come. He called Joab again.
Yeah, Joab. Yeah.
And then he turned around and he burned his field.
Yeah.
I always wondered if
Yeah.
Joab said,
Yeah.
"You won't burn my field."
Yeah. Joab's very vindictive too, because Joab also had the other king that that he didn't like, and he met with David, and they made a truce. And as he was leaving, Joab goes and kills him. Yeah. Yeah. But there's a lot of leadership things that are going on there, because, and in this case, Israel as a people ought to be responding to their king appropriately. So you have a people who, in the past, struck the vulnerable of your own. We have Veterans Day and 4th of July, and we don't worship those things, but we also don't want to forget those things, right? Because of what has gone on before. There is a group of your own that were vulnerable as you were on the way to keeping the covenant that God has commanded you to keep. And they were exploited and taken and killed by Amalek. And you can't forget that. And you can't forget that. Which implies there's going to come a point in time when you want to forget that. And he says, no. Because if you had this, all of a sudden, this vengeful anger, revenge, bitterness, now all of a sudden you're carrying out justice, but it's justice in the wrong manner, in the wrong way. Yeah. So you've kind of got the fullness of that as well.
Vengeance is very difficult to understand because they had the right to be vengeful when it happened.
Yeah.
They didn't take that right, probably because Amalekites were too big for them.
Yeah.
God prompted them to be vengeful for him,
Yes.
using them as the tools to carry that out.
Yes. I think it's a good lesson on what our strengths and weaknesses. If a person who is naturally, let's use this example. A person who is naturally aggressive, he doesn't have to be taught or trained to be aggressive. What does he have to be? Disciplined, controlled. I've had this conversation with my boys as it relates to being boys. You get pushed, use a specific, you get pushed on the basketball court. What do you want to do? Push back, knock his block off. But what actually is strength? Strength is actually discipline and restraint. Now, some might say, well, then you're not teaching him to be a man. No, because you're acting as though that discipline and that strength is a weakness. It doesn't say anything about the power of that boy. But what about now you've got, let's say, Nathan and Derek on the same team, and you've got a brother who sees his brother being attacked, but his nature is to withdraw. What do you have to say to that brother? Do what? Why didn't you? Because there's a difference. Your brother's response was appropriate because he wasn't acting in self-revenge or self-vengeance. If you had stepped in, what were you doing? Were you acting selfishly? You weren't. Why were you not? Because you were there to protect your brother. See, there's a same act, but it's different. It's totally different. And one might want to naturally throttle him, beat the snot out of him. Another might want to withdraw. And in certain circumstances, what do you have to do? One, you got to throttle back. One, you got to push forward in relation to that. And what's always that governor, if you will? Most of the time, it's the opposite of what you want to actually do. What you want to actually do. You know, a person who is always wanting to, fight the world, you're probably never going to have a problem saying, hey, go fight the world, because they're what? They're ready to go fight the world. But a person who always wants to stay back, what you going to have to tell them back off? No. What's going to have to happen? You need to remember. You need to remember. And you need to take a vengeance in relation to this. Why? Because there's going to be a part of you that doesn't want to. Yeah. Self-awareness for the purposes of God is a very good thing. Yeah, it's a very, very good thing. All right, let's pray. Father, grateful for your word, grateful for the time we spend in your word, and Father, just witnessing and seeing the fleshing out of the commandments as it relates to the covenant, in your people and by extension us. And Father, we pray that these truths and principles and values may make us think differently, soak into our heart, make us feel differently, and as we move forward, Father, move forward rightly before you, loving you, serving you as we ought. These things we pray in your Son's holy name. Amen.